All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're going to be talking about uh, language as a sociocultural tool.
Okay.
Sounds a little bit jargony,
Yeah.
but I think it's a really fascinating concept, and we've got some pretty cool academic articles and even some book chapters to pull from today.
Awesome.
And we're going to be looking at the work of Halliday and Vygotsky, who
Those
are,
are my favorites.
yeah, definitely some big names in this area.
Yeah.
Really, what we're talking about is not just how we learn to talk,
Right.
but how language kind of really shapes our whole worldview.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how when you look at these sources, it goes so far beyond just a means of communication.
Right.
It's the system for making meaning.
Hmm.
And it's so connected to our social and cultural experiences.
So it's not just about, memorizing grammar rules or something like that.
Exact.
It's about how language functions in a social context.
Yeah. Halliday, he actually called language a social semiotic, which is basically the way we use language is completely informed by the social groups we belong to and the culture we're in.
Hmm.
And it's almost like it becomes this lens through which we view the world around us,
That makes me think of how different communities might have their own, you know, slang terms or ways of expressing things
Yeah,
that are unique to them.
absolutely. And I think that really highlights how language isn't this static system.
Hmm.
It's constantly evolving and adapting
Right.
based on the social contexts.
All this is reminding me of Vygotsky. He was a developmental psychologist, right?
Yeah, he was.
I feel like he talked about language as a tool
He did, yep.
that develops through social interaction.
Absolutely. So both Halliday and Vygotsky, they both looked at language development through that sociocultural lens.
Hmm.
And they believed that it wasn't simply something that we're born with,
Okay.
but something that develops through these interactions that we have with other people.
Okay, so it's not just nature, it's nurture.
Yeah, exactly. And then this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They both argued that language actually shapes the way we think.
Whoa, hold on. So the way we use language with other people can actually influence our own internal thought processes.
That's right.
Is there, research that shows this? It's not just a theory.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was one study, and this was way back in 1986, that Wells talks about,
Right.
where this child was learning the words hot and burn. So the child first hears the word hot when they're interacting with their mother near a radiator,
Oh.
right? So they're getting that association.
Okay.
Later on, the child sees a bonfire, and they ask, burn. And the mother confirms, yes, it will burn.
So the child's taking that previous experience, that word, and they're applying it to a new situation,
Yes.
trying to make sense of it.
They're using the language based on that earlier interaction to kind of understand this new experience with fire.
Yeah. It's like they're building a bridge, right?
Yes, exactly.
Between these different concepts.
And I think this is a key takeaway here.
Okay.
Language development isn't just about learning new words.
Mm.
It's about making sense of the world through these social interactions and the guidance of these more experienced individuals.
That's really cool. It makes me think about how many different ways kids are exposed to language today.
Yeah.
Like the internet, video games, all that stuff. How do you think that's influencing their development?
I mean, that's a great question. And it's definitely an area that needs more research.
Right.
But Vygotsky was really interested in how these kinds of interactions, or what he called mediation, contribute to learning.
Mediation.
And he believed that interaction with, those more knowledgeable others provides this, scaffold for learners to build upon.
So it's not just about being exposed to language. It's about having someone to guide you,
Exactly.
help you make those connections.
Right. And this leads to some really interesting real-world applications.
Okay.
Like one example is Feuerstein's learning potential assessment device.
Okay, that sounds kind of intense.
Yeah.
LPAD.
Yeah, LPAD.
What is that?
So it's basically a method for assessing learning difficulties
Okay.
that's based on these Vygotsky principles.
Mm.
But instead of just traditional testing, which kind of just measures what a child already knows,
Right.
LPAD really focuses on assessing their potential for learning
Interesting.
through guided interaction.
So it's more about, figuring out how a kid can grow, right?
Yes,
With the
Yeah.
right support, rather than just putting a label on them
exactly.
based on what they can do right now.
And it's a much more, I think, hopeful
Yeah, definitely.
and dynamic way of looking at learning and development. And it shows how crucial that social interaction and that guidance is,
Okay.
especially for those who might be struggling.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool approach. I like that. So it's not focused on limitations.
Right.
It's really identifying potential.
Yes.
Are there other examples of how this language as a sociocultural tool plays out in real life?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So let's consider the experiences of blind students who are integrated into mainstream schools.
Okay.
This was something that Guzman and Kozulin looked at back in 2000, and they found that these students, they often face these kind of unique challenges when it comes to developing a deep understanding of certain concepts.
Yeah, I can imagine. If language is so tied to our experiences,
Right.
and if those experiences are limited in some way, I
Exactly.
could see how that might make it harder to grasp certain ideas.
Yeah, and what Guzman and Kozulin found was that these students sometimes struggle to connect that abstract verbal knowledge
Okay.
that they learn in school with their own concrete, like tactile experiences.
Oh, that makes sense.
A sighted child can see a tree, touch its bark, smell the leaves.
Right, they're using all their senses.
They're engaging multiple senses.
Yeah.
But a blind child, they might only be able to touch the bark.
Right.
So their understanding of tree might be incomplete in a way.
Yeah.
And I think this really underscores the importance of recognizing how various factors,
Okay.
like cultural and social experiences, even things like blindness, can influence language development and learning.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the need for, teaching methods that take these differences into account
Okay.
and provide the necessary support.
So we're talking about like a more individualized approach to education,
Exactly.
where teachers are sensitive to the fact that kids are coming from different backgrounds
Yeah.
and they have different needs.
Yeah, it's about creating those learning environments where everyone has the opportunity to really build those conceptual bridges.
I love that, even if the materials they're using to build those bridges are different.
Exactly.
Now, I want to kind of shift gears a bit and talk about how a child's family environment might shape their language development.
Okay.
Like, what do researchers know about that connection?
Well, research consistently shows that, the family environment plays a huge role in a child's language journey. I mean, everything, the quality and the quantity of language interactions, the types of language used,
Sure.
even the ways that parents respond to their children's attempts to communicate.
Okay, so it's not just about how much talking's going on.
No.
It's about, like, the richness of the interaction.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about creating that environment that's stimulating, where kids feel comfortable exploring language, experimenting, even making mistakes without being judged.
Right, yeah, safe space. But families come in all shapes and sizes now.
Hmm.
Do those variations in family structure have an impact on kids' language?
I mean, that's a really great question, and researchers are definitely looking at that right now.
Hmm.
We know that different family structures can lead to different language experiences,
Okay.
but there's no one ideal structure.
Right.
What matters most is the quality of those interactions
Okay.
and the opportunities for communication within that family unit.
Gotcha. It sounds like the key is just creating a rich language environment.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the family looks like. But what about the broader social context?
Mm.
Like, how do things like, socioeconomic status or cultural background influence language development?
I mean, that's another crucial layer, right?
Yeah.
A child's position within that larger social structure, it absolutely intertwines with their language development. I mean, socioeconomic status, cultural background, community values, all these things, they all come into play.
This is so complex. It really highlights how connected language is to everything.
Yeah.
It's like this thread running through all of human experience.
It is. And that interconnectedness, I think it brings us to another really critical point.
Okay.
Recognizing and valuing those diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds that students bring to the classroom.
Especially important nowadays with all the diversity we see in classrooms.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. If we look at language as this sociocultural tool, we have to acknowledge that different cultures might use and value language in their own unique ways.
So like a kid who comes from a culture where storytelling is super important
Right.
might approach learning differently
Exactly.
than a kid from a culture that emphasizes, more straightforward communication.
Exactly. And it's not about saying one approach is right or wrong. It's about understanding and respecting those differences
Right.
and seeing them as strengths,
Yeah.
not deficits.
This is so important for teachers to understand.
It is.
It's about creating learning environments that celebrate those different heritages.
Yeah.
Not trying to force everyone into the same mold, but language and culture, they're not static, are they?
Not at
They're
all.
changing all the time, right?
They're constantly evolving and transforming,
Yeah.
influencing each other in this really dynamic interplay.
So it's like a two-way street.
Yeah.
Language shapes culture, and then culture shapes language.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it.
It's like they're dancing.
It is. And both Halliday and Vygotsky, they really emphasize this dynamic and evolving nature of language and culture.
Okay.
And they understood that language wasn't fixed, but it's constantly being shaped, reshaped by the people who use it.
So like every time we interact, every new word we invent, all the new slang terms,
all of it.
we're contributing to this evolution of language.
Exactly. And this evolution it's tied to these social and cultural shifts. I mean, think about how technology has impacted language in recent years.
We've got new words. Old words have new meanings. The way we communicate is totally different.
Yeah. It's like language is this living organism constantly adapting to its environment.
To its environment, exactly.
And this constant change really underscores the importance of embracing diversity. And promoting inclusivity, because when we welcome those different perspectives, those different ways of using language, we're contributing to a much more vibrant and dynamic linguistic landscape.
It's like we're adding new colors
Yes.
to the palette of human expression.
Exactly. Now, before we go too far, I want to go back to that idea of mediation that we were talking about with Vygotsky and kind of dig a little deeper into that.
Okay, yeah. Remind us again what mediation is all about.
So in Vygotsky's framework, it's all about how social interaction drives learning and development. And it emphasizes how those interactions with, more knowledgeable others, so parents, teachers, peers, can support learners in acquiring new knowledge and skills.
So they're like guides, right?
Yes.
Helping us navigate new territory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they provide what Vygotsky called scaffolding.
Scaffolding.
Which is basically offering support and guidance that's gradually withdrawn as the learner becomes more competent.
Oh, okay, I see. Like training wheels.
Exactly.
And eventually you don't need them anymore. Okay. This is starting to make sense to me, how this idea of mediation really works in real-world learning.
Yeah.
But how is it especially relevant to those with disabilities?
So Vygotsky believed that, learners with disabilities, they often require very specific mediation strategies to support their language development.
So like recognizing that different learners might need different kinds of support to really reach their potential.
Exactly.
So it's about individualizing the support.
Yes, and this emphasis on individualized learning leads us to this fascinating application of mediation called dynamic assessment, or DA.
DA, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what it is, though.
So dynamic assessment, it's rooted in Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development. Which is essentially that sweet spot for learning. It's that space between what a learner can do independently and what they can achieve with the help of someone more knowledgeable.
So it's like the zone where learning is like primed to happen.
Yes. And DA tacks into this zone.
Okay.
So instead of just measuring what a learner can do on their own, DA focuses on assessing their potential for growth through that guided interaction and support.
So we're not just looking at the finished product.
Right.
We're looking at the process and how much they can grow.
Exactly. And that's really what sets DA apart from those traditional testing methods, which tend to be more static and just focus on measuring current abilities.
So traditional testing is like taking a snapshot. DA is like filming a movie.
Yes.
You're seeing them in action. You're understanding their potential.
Exactly.
We're seeing how they can grow.
Yeah, and it makes it much more powerful for identifying their needs and guiding those interventions.
That's cool. But how does all this connect back to the idea of language as a sociocultural tool?
Well, if we think of language as that tool for learning and development, DA provides a framework for understanding how to use that tool more effectively. It helps us assess their current language mastery, their potential for growth, and the specific mediation strategies that might best support their progress.
It's like we're giving them the tools to build their own understanding of language.
And that brings us to another really fascinating dimension of language as this sociocultural tool. It's connection to identity formation.
Oh, this is interesting. How does language play a role in who we become?
I mean, language is so intricately woven into how we construct our sense of self.
Hmm.
both individually and socially.
Okay.
So it's not just a way to convey information,
Right.
but it's also a way to express who we are and where we
Yeah.
fit in.
It's like our words become a mirror,
Yes.
reflecting both our inner world and our
Yes.
place in society.
Absolutely. And researchers are really actively exploring this complex relationship between language and identity.
What are they finding?
Well, studies are showing that different social and cultural groups, they use language to express these unique perspectives,
Okay.
values, beliefs, experiences. And these linguistic practices, they contribute to a shared sense of identity within those groups.
So language becomes a symbol of belonging.
Yes,
A way to show you're part of a community.
exactly. And that sense of belonging can be so powerful.
Yeah.
It shapes how we see ourselves and how we interact with the world.
It's not just about connecting with people. It's about understanding who we are,
Exactly.
where we fit in.
And that brings us full circle
Okay.
to the practical applications
Yeah.
of this sociocultural perspective on language.
Right. How do we take all this knowledge
Right.
and use it to make a positive impact?
I mean, there's so much we can do.
Yeah. Like, where do we even begin?
I think education's a great place to start.
Okay.
You know, if we acknowledge that language is so connected
Right.
to a child's background, their culture,
Yeah.
shouldn't that change how we teach?
Yeah. I mean, if we're saying that language is so intertwined with all these things,
Right?
it seems like it would make sense to adjust our teaching methods.
Exactly. It means moving away from that kind of one-size-fits-all approach
Right.
and recognizing that kids learn in different ways,
Hmm.
you know?
So instead of assuming every kid learns the same,
Yeah.
we're saying, no, let's tailor how we teach
Yes, let's customize it.
to each kid's needs, to their strengths.
Exactly. Creating environments that are inclusive,
Yeah.
culturally responsive.
Hmm.
Recognizing that different cultures might have different ways of using and valuing language.
Wouldn't this benefit all learners?
I think so, not just those from marginalized groups.
Yeah.
Everyone, because you're bringing in all these different perspectives,
Right.
all these different ways of using language.
It enriches the whole experience.
Exactly.
Okay, so education's a big one. What about, like, therapy?
Oh, absolutely.
I could see this being really relevant there.
Yeah. I mean, therapists, counselors,
Mhm.
psychologists,
Yeah.
anyone working with language and communication,
Right.
they can benefit from understanding how someone's background,
Hmm.
their culture, really shapes how they use language.
So it's about seeing the whole person.
Yes, not just treating the symptoms.
Right, but understand, like, the root
Yes.
of where those problems might be coming from.
Exactly.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Especially in our globalized world. How can we use this to improve communication across cultures?
I mean, when we see language as this sociocultural tool, we start to understand how culture influences things like communication styles, nonverbal cues, even how we understand things.
Right, so it's not just about learning the words.
Right.
It's about learning the culture.
Yes, being fluent in the culture.
Okay, so we need to be fluent in cultures
Yeah.
as well as languages.
I think so, yeah. And that can help us bridge divides,
Yeah.
avoid misunderstandings,
Right.
create those meaningful connections.
Yeah, build empathy.
Exactly.
Okay, that's huge.
Yeah.
This actually could have really big implications
It could.
for promoting social justice.
I think so, yeah. Because when we understand how language can be used to marginalize or empower,
Right.
we can start to change those harmful practices.
So it's about recognizing how language can, like, perpetuate stereotypes,
Yeah.
reinforce biases,
Yeah,
even silence people.
exactly. But it's also recognizing how it can be used to fight those things, to challenge them.
Okay, so reclaim language as a tool
Yes.
for positive change.
We're good.
Wow, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
Well, we have.
What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Language is more than just a means of communication.
Right, we've definitely established that.
It shapes how we think, how we connect with others, how we see the world.
It's tied to our social and cultural backgrounds.
Yeah.
It's always changing.
It is.
And it can really shape who we are.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up today,
Yeah.
we want to leave everyone with a question
Okay.
to think about. How can you use this understanding of language
Yeah.
as this powerful tool to navigate your world
Yeah.
and make a positive impact? Thanks for joining us.